This is Chris Wolf, and it is March 13th, 2023, and I am a volunteer with the Nebraska Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation Share a Story project. Bellevue University is the sponsor of the Memorial Park project, and I am just a volunteer with that program. So at this point in time, I would like to introduce Bob Betancur.
That's correct.
And Bob, please tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us your name and where you were born. And
My name is Bob Betancur. I'm a lifelong citizen of Western Nebraska. Graduated from Mitchell High School in 1964. Went to Scottsbluff Community College 2 years, ran out of money, so I decided I better take a new adventure in life. Myself and two of my friends joined the United States Army in September of 1966. We went to basic training together, and then best friend Alan Helling and I went to Fort Benning, Georgia to continue our AIT, our Advanced Individual Training. Stan Masson went to Missouri, where he continued his Advanced Individual Training there. Both Alan and I stayed in the United States about a year, and then Stan also stayed about a year in the United States, and then we all got our orders to go to Vietnam. I went to Vietnam and landed at Cam Ranh Bay. I was assigned to the first Cav unit, an infantry unit, but for some reason that night, two of us were put on a Caribou, a larger airplane, and we were flown down to Saigon. At Saigon, I went to the 90th Replacement, and it was there that I was assigned to the 1st Combat Aviation Group, a helicopter unit in Vietnam. When we talk about our experiences in Vietnam, you have to break it down into two categories. The first being the physical idea that you were in a foreign country fighting for whatever you believed in or you were taught to believe in. That was the first part, the physical encounters of being away from home. The second part was a psychological warfare that went on within each of our own minds. In the physical part of it, some of us were assigned to be chaplain's assistants, some of us were assigned to be straight up infantry, some of us were into heavy building of bridges, tearing down of bridges, rebuilding them. Some of us, like myself, I was assigned to a helicopter unit. I had never been exposed to helicopters to be a gunner, but I learned. It was OJT, on-the-job training. As I went, I learned. The physical part of it affected us all. We were away from home. We were kids. At that time, we thought we were grown men. I tell people I went over as a 19-year-old kid and came back as a 60-year-old kid. The changes in the psyche of my mind were tremendous. I didn't understand them now, and I'm not so sure that at the age of 77, I understand them now. The difficulties that we faced were physical. Not only did we fight the elements, the wind, the rain, the mud, but we fought the enemy. In those days, the contact between us and them was about 15 feet. They were right in your face when we encountered the enemy. It's a lot different when I flew and was a gunner, when I would shoot down at people. I didn't see the damage that I did. I didn't see it. But when you're fighting in the jungle and you're on a sortie, on a mission, sometimes the enemy is right in your face before you encounter what was then known as the enemy. The physical elements of being away from home are tremendous. You're a kid. What did you know? Well, I experienced being away from home. Couldn't call home. No such thing as a cell phone. So I shared my loneliness with my comrades in arms. I relied on two of my best friends in the whole wide world, Mr. Jim Beam and Mr. Coca-Cola. Jim Beam and Coke got me through a lot of tough times. I shared that with my buddies, so the physical elements were always present. If it wasn't raining, you were knee-deep in mud. If you weren't knee-deep in mud, you were up to your waist in dust. And that's just the way it was. That's just the way it was, so we learned to adapt. It was hard to become friends with anybody because you never knew when the friendship would end. Either they got to come home and were happy, or they came home in a body bag. Those ideas are hard for people to understand until you actually feel it and see it. When I landed in Vietnam, I could smell the country. You could smell it. And it is a smell I will never forget. I experienced watching a small airplane go down with the guys trapped inside. They couldn't get out. We watched the airplane burn. You'll never forget the smell of burning human flesh. You'll see guys that were wounded that you'll never know how they survived. I can remember watching a Vietnamese airborne ranger step on a bouncing Betty. That was a landmine. It blew him off at the crotch and it blew him off at the shoulders. Lost both legs and both arms, and yet he was alive. What kind of life was it in store for him? I'll never know. But I saw what happened when he stepped on that bouncing Betty. A lot of their booby traps were not made to kill you, but to maim you. Your feet, your arms, your face. A lot of us, like myself, I suffered in my feet what is known as jungle rot. I guess it's just an advanced case of athlete's foot. But it's really hard. I can remember there was one young gentleman of the Caucasian race in my platoon. We crossed a creek, never think anything about it. Well, that night when we were back at base camp, he took off his shirt and he had hard leeches on his back. So all we did was scrape them off with a knife and life went on. But the problem was a couple weeks later, there was some big white spots on his back. Never knew what they were. So you don't know exactly if the elements didn't kill you, then the enemy would. So and sometimes the physical hazards that we encountered, a lot of those I've forgotten about it. Being from Nebraska, oh my goodness, the big game in Nebraska is football. If we had as many people going to church as we do going to Saturday football games, our churches would be packed. Well, in those days, being from Nebraska, we wanted to play football. So we set up a field of our own, marked it off at 10-yard increments. Well, that night, guess what? We got mortared. And guess what? They came in at 10-yard increments. We didn't know that then, but now we know. Things you learn. But as a 19-year-old kid, I thought I knew every answer in the book. Was I not there to preserve humanity from the hordes of communism? I thought I was John Wayne. The problem was the bullets that they fired at me were real. They were real bullets, and we didn't know how. You don't come back from the dead. Once you're dead, you're dead. The atrocities that were committed by, quote-unquote, the United States Army are unbelievable. Just unbelievable what we did, all in the name of liberty, justice, and freedom for all. It was tough, but at that time, you didn't worry about the consequences. You worried about staying alive from one day to the next. One of the biggest coming to Jesus moments I had was in Christmas of 1967. We had services in this large crater that had been sandbagged. And we had a priest, a rabbi, and a minister coming there to give us Christmas services. I'll never forget the young man I sat next to was a Baptist from Alabama. I was a Catholic from western Nebraska. It was so funny because we both started crying and we held hands. And then he looked at me and he said, "You know, you wouldn't be welcome in my church back in Alabama." And I said, "I know." And he said, "But here, guess what? We're praying to the same God on the same night, hoping that we can make it to the next Christmas." To me, that was a coming to Jesus moment. Because here I was with another kid from the South, hoping we could make it back to our home the following Christmas. The physical difficulties of Vietnam are just so many that I forget. I forgot what it's like for those first 6 months to eat a hamburger. I forgot what it was like to sleep without my gun and my pants and my boots at the foot of my bunk. Forgot what it was like. Forgot what it was like to go to Mass on Sundays. Forgot what it was like to just say hi to my mom. Forgot what it was like just to wait for maybe my girlfriend would write me a letter. Just to say, hi Bob, how are you? Was it hard? Of course it was. Because mail call was one of the big positive elements in our life. The physical attributes that happened to each and every one of us, we weren't shared by just one person. We were shared by a group. It was that feeling of camaraderie that we were there. We would always have each other's back. That was the physical side of the war. Now we'll look at the most important part, the psychological effects of what that war did to each and every one of us in our own small minds. What's it like to miss home? What's it like? For some of us, it was difficult. For some of us, it was an escape from reality. What was it like to come from the barrios of New York, and California, where a lot of the Puerto Ricans, the Mexicans, and other Spanish-speaking people lived? What was it like to come from the ghettos in New York, in Chicago, in LA, in San Francisco? What's it like to come from those areas where racism was still a battle that we all fought each and every day? I fought the battle of racism my whole life. You don't want to hear about it, people don't like to talk about it, but we all suffered some form of racism. One night in base camp, they showed a movie. It was called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? That's where Sidney Poitier kissed a white girl. We were in base camp. The screen was burned, and we had a mini riot at the NCO club. Why? Because racism existed everywhere and still exists everywhere in the world today. When I joined the Army in 1966, the South had just went through some tremendous struggles for equal rights. I was from Nebraska. What did I know about equal rights? How did I know what it felt like to be black? I knew what it felt like to be brown, and how people, because of my skin color, didn't always let me explore the world of education, to be a professional, to be able to express my feelings without being put down. Racism existed in my small town of Mitchell, Nebraska. Mexicans were only allowed to live in certain areas. Mexicans weren't allowed to eat in the restaurant. We had to be served out the back door. We had to sit on one side of the theater in Mitchell, Nebraska. And I went to a Catholic church, St. Teresa's, and all the white people sat on the left, and all the Mexicans sat on the right. People shake their heads and say, no, that couldn't have happened. Yes, it did happen. But you don't want to hear about that, because in a time of war, you think that we would look beyond the color of your skin and look at why we were all there. It sounds good in paper, and it sounds good in sociology and psychology class, but that's not the way it was, even in Vietnam. The hardships that we all endured, like I said before, whether you were a chaplain's assistant, whether you were a heavy mechanic operator, whether you were a grunt or a foot soldier, we all experienced some of those feelings. We brought all of those feelings back with us. Now, a lot of us suffered from drug abuse, from alcohol abuse, and from the lack of feeling, the lack of emotions that go with being a young man growing up. A lot of us experienced divorce in our lives at a young age because we didn't know how to love somebody. We didn't know how. And if you went to anybody for help, how could they help you if they didn't know what was going on inside your heart or inside your mind? I was very fortunate. I did try to seek help, and I did go to inpatient at Bethesda Hospital in Denver, Colorado. At that time, they didn't even know what PTSD was. So I was diagnosed with anger management. Of course I got angry. I got angry of those feelings inside me on what I had done or what I had failed to do. Those were my feelings inside, but they told me it was an anger issue. And years later, they found out that maybe it was PTSD. Well, guess what? I thought if I went to the hospital, got a shot in my arm, it would all be over. I wanted the instant fix right now. Well, guess what? I'm 77 years old and I'm still suffering PTSD. Didn't go away, gang. It did not go away. What is hard now is for my government, this government of the United States, to understand what happened as a result of all of our experiences in Vietnam. We were all exposed to something known as Agent Orange. I could never understand it. I didn't even know I had been exposed to it. And yet, I'm feeling those consequences in the later years of my life. I got latent life sugar diabetes. I've got neuropathy in both feet. I had skin lesions on my back. Some of those things I understand the way my wife has told me, who was a nurse for 51 years, that some of that just comes with old age. Oh, I understand that. But I think being exposed to Agent Orange hurried up the process as to what really happened to our bodies. A lot of us who survived Vietnam are still struggling with the mental issues, the psychological effects that we have suffered in our life because they didn't go away and we did not grow them. So Vietnam holds a story for each of us. Some of us made it, some of us didn't. I lost my next door neighbor, Louis Pina, in Vietnam. I lost my best friend that I met in the military, who was with the 101st Airborne, Benjamin Mondragon. Both of them Mexicans. I lost another Mexican friend from Mitchell. He was a chopper gunner who was shot down. So I felt the effects of what it was like to lose someone close to my heart in Mitchell, Nebraska. I look at my class. Their names are forever in my mind. Danny Ramoto, Joseph Cisneros, Mr. Phillips, Mr. Pina, all these guys, Alan Helling, Stan Matson. All of these guys came from a small town in Nebraska. We all did what we thought was right. We all did this in the name of justice and the American way of living. Years later on, we found out that the conflict never left us. Not only were we still, some of us are still physically in Vietnam, and I can guarantee it, 100% of us are still emotionally tied to what we saw, to what we experienced in the Republic of Vietnam. I served in the Republic of Vietnam from September of 1967 to October of 1968. Like I said, I went over as a 19-year-old young man, and I came back as a 16-year-old man, both physically and mentally. I still thank God that I still have the opportunity to speak to other people, to other veterans who are suffering the same pain and anguish that I am. I understand them. I want to tell all those guys not to give up. I want to tell all those guys that, you know what, there are still a few of us left. And what makes me appreciate my health, go to a VA hospital. Go to a VA hospital. See what those guys suffered. See what those guys really suffered. Don't forget, right here on this hat, Vietnam. Don't forget, guys, we were there. We don't have to be schooled about what we suffered, what we undertook as, as our mission in life. So that's my story. Not a very pleasant one, because you don't want to hear the psychological effects that war has on the human mind, the physical effects that it has on the human body. You don't want to hear about those things, yet they existed. They really did. And at any time, I will be gladly to share with you or anybody else of what happened in the country known as Vietnam. I will gladly answer any questions that you might have. you can contact Chris Wolf. I'm sure she can contact me, and we can answer or have a discussion on my 13 months in Vietnam.
So you talked about doing a second tour of
Yes.
duty. What all did that involve?
When I came back from Vietnam, I wanted to help other kids. The person who had the most effect on my life was my drill instructor in basic training. I came back to the United States. I wanted to be a drill instructor. So I went to school to be a DI, and I was fortunate to serve for almost a year with C Company, 1st Battalion, 1st Brigade, Fort Lewis, Washington. That was the greatest experience of my life, of trying to help others. Well, I was all of 20 years, I was a 20-year-old man. I was old. I knew everything there was to know about war. By golly, I was going to teach those kids what it's like. All I wanted them to do was to learn how to survive in a conflict, a real conflict, a conflict not only of your mind, but of your body. I wanted them to understand what I had shared with others in Vietnam and how I had been fortunate enough to come back. In Vietnam, my only part that I lost of my body, I am completely deaf in my right ear. When we got overrun at Tet, I caught a foreign object in my right ear. And at that time, all I did was bleed a little, so all we did was clean up my ear and continue the march. Well, when I came back, one morning I woke up and I thought the television set was on. Well, it was off, but there's a steady ringing in my right ear. I went to Bethesda in Washington, and I went there and they gave me all the tests and all this, that, and the other, and they finally looked inside my right ear and there's nothing there. In my right ear there is nothing but scar tissue. So I am completely deaf in my right ear. Well, for me that was a small price to pay. I see guys with their no legs, missing an arm, their face completely destroyed by getting caught in a firefight or an explosion. So I was real fortunate that I only lost one ear. Sometimes you have to understand the complex system of government that is called the United States Army, on how they function or how they malfunction. And that's what's hard for a lot of people to understand. Like I told you before, I saw John Wayne. He went through all these terrible conflicts. He even fought the war in Vietnam. There was a movie called The Green Berets that starred good old John Wayne. Interesting part, he was never in the military. Never. John Wayne never served one day in the military. But he was a good example for me as a young boy to look at. He went all the way from fighting in the frontier to the Alamo to the Green Berets. And he always survived. No matter how many times he was shot or stabbed or suffered the rigors of life, he always came out on top. Well, some of us were really impressed by that. And I think we went to Vietnam with that John Wayne syndrome. And so I wanted to teach these kids as a DI that the bullets are real. You don't get a second chance. If you lose an arm, you can't reattach it, like in the movies. Once you're dead, you're dead. And that's all there is to it. So I was trying to share what information, what knowledge, what experience I had with them. About 15, 20 years ago, I received a call one night, and the person on the other end was looking for Drill Sergeant Betancur. And I said, yes, this is he. I'm Bob. And he said, Drill Sergeant, you'll never remember me because I was in one of your platoons at Fort Lewis, Washington. And I said, you're right. I'd have to look at the pictures to remember your face. He said, when I went to Vietnam, when I came back, I was a drill instructor. To me, that was one of the greatest achievements that I've done in my life, that I helped save one kid. I inspired one person to do the best he could and come back and spread that knowledge with others. I also served in the military from 71 to 74. I was in New Jersey, and I was working with the classified section of the United States government. I won't share a lot of that with you, other than to tell you that I was on civilian status, and I got to do a lot of things that I would never have seen. I was a young kid from Mitchell, Nebraska, who spent 3 years in New Jersey, right across the Verrazano Straits from New York. You can't imagine what it was like for a kid from Nebraska to see New York City. My goodness, I had never seen so many people in one little place. But that was then, this is now. I was glad for my 3 years that I spent in New Jersey. It was a good experience. But that's, once again, a part of my past that I have now tried to put behind me. Those 3 years in New York, yes, I learned a lot, was exposed to different cultures, but it was nothing like Vietnam. And that's all I can tell you about those 3 years. I did have to sign a piece of paper when I left the military in New Jersey that I could not talk about what I had done for 10 years. And so I just shrugged that one off and called it a good experience. Gladly answer any other questions that you might have.
So you've talked about some of the issues that you've had, the PTSD and that type of thing. How did your life change? When did your life change when you decided that you needed to do something with this?
I think as I grew older, I became more aware of where I was at. When I came back and relocated in Denver, Colorado, the 4th of July was the worst holiday in the world for me. The sudden explosions, the flares, the repercussion of a loud firework really scared me. I used to hide under the bed. So at this time, I knew that I had to change my life because I couldn't go on hiding. I had given up drinking. When I came back from Vietnam, I was drinking quite a bit, my senior year in college. One morning I woke up, didn't know where I was at, didn't know who I was with, didn't know where my car was at. That day I said never again. And I haven't since that senior year in college.
Good for you.
I never did smoke, so I wasn't worried about cigarettes, but I gave up alcohol. I tell my friends, I gave up cigarettes, I gave up alcohol. 2 out of 3, that's not bad. So I still have a little room to share a few vices here and now. I think when we look at other things, we will see how the PD affected each and every one of us. All of us will have, excuse the phrase, a come to Jesus moment. That's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to decide for yourself. But not all of us have the courage, the intestinal fortitude to make that decision. Ma'am, we've tried therapy. Ma'am, we've tried electric shock treatment. Ma'am, we've tried a lot of the quote-unquote therapies to deal with PTSD or anger management, as I was first diagnosed as. But that's up to the individual. You can't say that on March 3rd, 1985, I saw the light. I can't say that. And I think those issues are for each and every one of us to combat, okay?
Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
All right. Any last words that you would like to give to veterans out there who may be going through some of these issues?
I think the advice I would give was, look, seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and the door shall be open. That's what we have to do. And don't expect everybody in this whole wide world to understand what we are going through. Look at us. I was young when I went over. I'm 77 now. How many of us are left? How many of us at my age are willing to reach out, extend a hand, and help somebody either up or reach up and have somebody help us up? How many men have that courage? Sometimes, like myself, I thought PTSD could be cured. If I went to therapy for 6 weeks, I'd come out smelling like a rose. Guess what, guys? It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. So please continue to ask. Please continue to seek. And someday, somewhere, somehow, maybe a wheel will click and you'll start to understand where you're at and what can happen.
Very good. Okay, well, Bob, thank you so much for sharing your story today. You've touched me in a lot of ways, and I feel very honored to be listening to your story.
Thank you so much. And there's just one more word I would like to say. De colores. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob.